September 2nd, 1995. Richard Martin, just 24 years old, left Nancy's diner along Highway 81 in South Carolina. Like any other ordinary night, friends described him as hardworking, kind, a young man with dreams bigger than the small town he lived in. But that night, something went terribly wrong. Richard would not make it home, and for decades, no one knew why or who was responsible. 2.5 miles down the highway, a shocking discovery. Richard, beaten and barely clinging to life, left on the roadside like a lifeless shadow of the man he once was. The streets were silent, the neon lights of the diner flickering, and the air thick with unanswered questions. What happened in those final moments? Who did this to him? And why did this case vanish into the cold shadows of time? Police arrived, combing every inch of the highway, questioning neighbors, retracing steps that seemed to vanish into thin air. Leads dried up. Witnesses came forward with fragments, but nothing concrete. Every theory raised more questions than answers. A community gripped by fear and mystery, a victim fighting for life, and a case that would remain unsolved for 30 long years. The clues were there, but hidden, buried, and waiting to be uncovered. Stick with us, because this story is far from over. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share. Don't miss a single twist, a single revelation. Trust me, every detail matters, and by the end, you'll understand why even the coldest cases can't stay buried forever. South Carolina, a quiet stretch of Highway 81, the kind of road where every familiar face tells a story, and every night carries its own rhythm. Richard Martin, 24 years old, had spent the evening at Nancy's, a small diner where everyone knew his name. Hardworking, ambitious, with plans for a future bigger than the town he called home, Richard was the kind of young man who carried hope in his hands. Not fear, not fear. That night, though, hope would be tested in ways nobody could imagine. He left the diner like any other night, the neon sign humming behind him, casting its flickering light across the asphalt. But hours later, the calm of the countryside would be shattered. 2.5 miles down the highway, Richard was found beaten, battered, barely clinging to life. He wasn't just a victim of violence. He was a puzzle piece in a mystery that would remain unsolved for 3 long decades. Imagine the scene, the empty highway stretching endlessly into the darkness. Only the soft glow of streetlights guiding the eyes of the first responders. The air smelled faintly of pine and something darker, something that had lingered unnoticed for years. Neighbors would later recall hearing sirens slicing through the quiet night, a sudden intrusion into a place where crime seemed almost impossible. But here it was, in the most unexpected way, leaving everyone asking the same question. How did this happen? And who could do this to someone so ordinary, so human? Authorities arrived quickly, piecing together a scene that made little sense. The injuries were severe, but the attack itself seemed almost ritualistic in its randomness. No witnesses came forward with clarity. No surveillance cameras captured the moments that mattered. The case was messy, and in those first hours, frustration mounted. Officers noted every detail of tire marks on the roadside, the crushed wildflowers at the edge of the highway, the scuff of shoes in the dirt, but none of it pointed to a clear answer. The trail was cold before it even started. Yet, the story of Richard Martin was far from over. For years, investigators would chase shadows, interrogate possible suspects, and sift through leads that went nowhere. The community watched in silent dread as days turned into months, months into years. For 30 years, Richard's story hung in the balance. A reminder that even in a town where everyone knows each other, the darkest secrets can hide in plain sight. But that's the thing about cold cases. They don't disappear. They wait. They linger in the corners of evidence rooms, in the memory of detectives, in the hearts of families who refuse to give up. And now, decades later, the case that baffled a small town for 30 years finally has answers. Stay with us, because what you're about to see isn't just a story of survival, it's a story of investigation, persistence, and justice. Every clue, every overlooked detail, every twist and turn of this case matters. By the end of this video, you'll understand why even the coldest mysteries can't stay buried forever. Richard Martin wasn't just another name in a police report. To those who knew him, he was a familiar presence. Someone whose laugh lingered longer than most, whose kindness quietly shaped the small South Carolina town he called home. At 24, he worked at Nancy's, a roadside diner known for its warm coffee and late-night fries. Reggers remembered him by name, noting his polite smile, his willingness to stay late when the diner got busy, and his quiet determination to make a better life for himself. Some said he dreamed of moving out west someday, maybe starting a family, maybe even owning a small ranch, ambitions far bigger than the town he grew up in. That night, September 2nd, 1995, Richard finished his shift and stepped out into the cool night air. The diner's neon sign hummed behind him, and the familiar scent of fried food lingered in the air. Friends waved goodbye, not knowing it would be the last time they saw him leave Nancy's unharmed. His car, a modest vehicle that had seen better days, was parked just a few feet from the diner entrance. He climbed in, started the engine, and drove off, heading toward the route he took countless times before. But somewhere along that familiar stretch of Highway 81, someone intercepted his path, changing the course of his life forever. Richard's family remembers him as thoughtful and grounded. He would call his mother every Sunday without fail, checking in, asking about her day, sharing small victories from work. His younger sister recalled late-night conversations filled with laughter and minor sibling arguments that now felt painfully trivial in hindsight. Everyone who knew him agreed Richard had a future full of promise, not a life that would hang by a thread on a lonely South Carolina highway. In the hours after he was last seen at Nancy's, the first signs of unease began to surface. Friends noticed he didn't call his family that evening, a break in his otherwise predictable pattern. By midnight, concern grew. Calls were made, messages left unanswered. The small-town network, tight-knit, as it was, began piecing together a growing fear. Something wasn't right. Richard had disappeared, and no one could explain where he went or why. Eyewitness accounts later suggested he might have stopped at a nearby gas station or diner further down the highway. Details were scarce, fragmented, and contradictory. Some claimed they saw a man matching Richard's description walking along the roadside, while others swore they saw a car with its lights off, idling strangely near the same stretch of road. These fragmented reports created a confusing puzzle for investigators, one that would take decades to clarify. Yet even then, the uncertainty added to the tension, painting a picture of a young man alone, vulnerable, and at the center of a mystery that seemed to grow darker with each passing hour. Richard's routine that night was simple, almost mundane. Finish work, drive home, relax, maybe catch up with friends, or make plans for the weekend. But the simplicity of his evening was shattered by violence that would leave him critically injured. That stark contrast, the ordinariness of his life against the extremity of what happened, would become a recurring theme for investigators as they tried to reconstruct the events of that fateful night. How could something so ordinary turn so violently wrong? That question haunted everyone involved. Neighbors and friends who later recounted Richard's character emphasized his reliability. He had no criminal record, no known enemies, and no history that would suggest a motive for attack. He was, in every sense, an innocent caught in circumstances he could never have foreseen. This innocence, combined with the severity of the attack, fueled the urgency of the investigation and amplified the shock within the community. Why would someone target him? Who could harbor such violence against a young man with a future so bright? Even today, when recalling Richard's last night before the attack, there is a palpable sense of disbelief. Investigators and family alike grapple with the idea that one ordinary evening, filled with routine and predictability, could turn into a nightmare that remained unresolved for decades. His life, ambitions, and dreams were suspended in time, waiting for the investigation to unravel the truth hidden in the shadows of Highway 81. As we move forward into the investigation, it's crucial to understand the man at the center of it all. Richard Martin wasn't just a case file or a statistic. He was a human being, young, ambitious, and full of potential. And the story of what happened to him is not only a tale of crime and mystery, but a story of human resilience, of a family's unwavering hope, and of a community desperate for answers. Every lead, every detail, and every testimony will now become part of the puzzle, guiding us closer to the shocking truth that remained buried for 30 years. The night air hung heavy over Highway 81 as first responders arrived on the scene. 2.5 miles from Nancy's diner, Richard Martin lay battered on the roadside, A young man whose ordinary evening had turned into a harrowing nightmare. The headlights of patrol cars cut through the darkness, illuminating the small clearing where Richard had been found. His injuries severe, his breathing shallow, and his survival uncertain. It was a scene that would haunt South Carolina for decades. The officer who first discovered him recalled the shock of seeing someone in such a vulnerable state. Blood stained the pavement, his clothes torn, and his body bruised from the attack. There were no immediate witnesses, no weapon in sight, and no obvious explanation for what had happened. The highway, usually a corridor of quiet travel, had become the stage for a crime so brutal that it defied logic. This was not just a physical assault, it was a message of fear, leaving questions that would linger unanswered for years. Paramedics rushed to Richard's side, working frantically to stabilize him. The community watched helplessly as he was loaded into an ambulance, his life hanging in the balance. It was a moment frozen in time, one that underscored both the fragility and resilience of the human spirit. That night, the town learned that violence could reach even the most unsuspecting corners of their lives, and that the line between safety and danger was thinner than anyone realized. As the emergency teams worked, detectives began to arrive, combing the scene for any clue that might explain the attack. Every detail was scrutinized. Tire marks on the shoulder of the highway, the crushed foliage along the roadside, and the faint impressions of footprints in the dirt. Even small details, a piece of cloth caught on a fence, a shattered watch lying near the body became critical evidence in a case that had no witnesses and almost no leads. Each investigator knew that these small fragments could be the key to unraveling a mystery that would span decades. The local community was immediately gripped by fear and speculation. How could someone commit such a violent act without being seen? Why? Target: Richard Martin. Rumors spread quickly, from possible accidents to more sinister explanations, but the truth remained elusive. Law enforcement faced the challenge of piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces, relying on a combination of forensic science, eyewitness accounts, and intuition. The clock was ticking, but answers were frustratingly out of reach. Forensic teams collected everything they could from the scene. Hair fibers, traces of blood, and small fragments of clothing were meticulously bagged for later analysis. In 1995, the technology available to investigators was limited. DNA testing existed but wasn't as advanced or widely accessible as it would become decades later. Despite these constraints, every possible lead was pursued. Officers questioned neighbors, interviewed passersby, and revisited the diner to reconstruct Richard's final movements. Each inquiry revealed fragments of information, but nothing substantial enough to point directly to a suspect. The initial investigation was hindered by the lack of security cameras and digital evidence. Investigators relied on the memories of witnesses, who often offered conflicting accounts. One motorist reported seeing a car speeding away near the same stretch of road. Another claimed to have seen a figure crouched beside the highway, but in the dim light, their description was vague and inconsistent. These contradictions would later frustrate law enforcement, but at the time, they represented the best hope of identifying a perpetrator. Richard's injuries were life-threatening. He was rushed to the hospital and placed in intensive care. Doctors described his condition as critical, with multiple fractures, contusions, and head trauma. The community waited in tense silence, hoping for any sign of recovery. Meanwhile, detectives returned to the scene repeatedly, attempting to identify patterns or overlooked clues. Every detail mattered, because even the smallest piece of evidence could ultimately lead to the person responsible for such a violent attack. The discovery of Richard Martin on Highway 81 marked the beginning of a long and complex investigation. It was a case defined by uncertainty, by the limitations of the time, and by the resilience of both the victim and the detectives determined to find answers. The night he was found would set in motion decades of work, painstaking analysis, and eventual breakthroughs that would finally shed light on a mystery that had haunted the community for 30 years. By the time the sun rose over South Carolina, Richard was still alive, but critically injured. The case had already begun to ripple through the town, leaving questions in its wake. Who did this? Why him? And could anyone ever piece together the truth hidden in the shadows along Highway 81? These questions would remain unanswered for decades, until modern forensic technology and tireless investigation finally revealed the shocking truth behind that fateful night. The days following Richard Martin's brutal attack on Highway 81 were filled with tension, confusion, and mounting frustration for the Anderson County Sheriff's Office. Investigators arrived at the scene, combing every inch of the roadside, meticulously cataloging evidence that might shed light on the attacker's identity. But despite their efforts, the trail seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared. Every lead led to another dead end. Every fragment of evidence raised more questions than answers. For the detectives, this wasn't just another case. It was a puzzle that refused to be solved. From the beginning, the challenge was immense. Richard had no known enemies. He was young, ambitious, and well-liked in his community. His life didn't suggest motives like jealousy, revenge, or dispute. Friends and family were interviewed repeatedly. They described him as responsible, trustworthy, and careful, leaving investigators grasping for any hint of a possible suspect. But time and again, the interviews returned the same answer. Richard didn't have enemies. That repeated affirmation became a source of both hope and frustration, for the detectives needed leads, not reassurances. The crime scene, while detailed and carefully documented, offered limited clues. Tire tracks led off into the darkness and were nearly impossible to match conclusively with any vehicle at the time. Small traces of clothing fibers and strands of hair were collected, but forensic technology in 1995 couldn't fully leverage such evidence. The early stages of DNA testing existed, but it was neither fast nor accessible for smaller police departments. Detectives often remarked privately that they were fighting not just the perpetrator, but the limitations of the era itself. Every day, the frustration grew. Officers conducted door-to-door inquiries along Highway 81 and surrounding neighborhoods. Anyone who had been driving on that stretch the night of September 2nd was questioned. A few accounts seemed promising at first. An unknown vehicle seen idling near the roadside. A shadowy figure glimpsed in the dim light, but each lead dissolved under scrutiny. Eyewitness accounts were inconsistent, often contradicting one another, and without corroborating evidence, these testimonies could not be used to advance the case. Yet investigators knew even the smallest details might prove crucial someday. Detectives also interviewed Richard's co-workers and regulars at Nancy's diner. They reconstructed his last known movements, minute by minute, searching for anything out of the ordinary. At first glance, his route seemed predictable. A drive home along the same stretch of Highway 81 he had used countless times. But subtle discrepancies in the timeline emerged. Some witnesses suggested he lingered longer at the diner than expected. Others claimed to have seen him driving erratically. Was it fear? Or was it just a disorientation of a small-town night? The uncertainty only deepened the mystery. By the third week, frustration had begun to mount. The investigation was expanding, with officers reviewing any unsolved cases in neighboring counties to find potential links. Some speculated that Richard's attack might be random, a case of violent opportunity. Others believed it was targeted, and that the perpetrator had a specific reason to choose him. Every theory was explored, but none yielded concrete results. Detectives kept detailed notes, cross-referencing every fact, hoping that one day a missing piece would emerge. Community involvement, while well-intentioned, created both assistance and confusion. Calls flooded the sheriff's office from people claiming to have seen suspicious activity or vehicles near the highway. Every tip required verification, every rumor scrutiny. While some leads held promise, most turned out to be unrelated, complicating the investigation. The detectives often worked long hours, chasing threads that disappeared. Their patience and resolve tested repeatedly, yet they never gave up, knowing that persistence was the only way to bring justice to a young man fighting for his life. Forensic analysis, though limited by the time, continued. The collected fibers, blood traces, and other evidence were cataloged for a future review. Officers consulted experts from the state crime lab, sharing every microscopic detail, hoping something might stand out. Even small details, a single shoe print, a piece of torn cloth could one day connect to a suspect. These seemingly minor observations would later prove invaluable when new forensic technologies became available decades later. Throughout the investigation, detectives maintained a careful balance between following hard evidence and observing human behavior. They scrutinized Richard's acquaintances, co-workers, and neighbors. They evaluated past incidents in the area, seeking patterns of violence, theft, or aggression that might align with the attack. Each lead was cataloged and stored, creating a growing mountain of information. While progress was slow, detectives remained meticulous, understanding that one overlooked detail could mean the difference between solving the case and it remaining forever cold. Despite these painstaking efforts, Months passed with little progress. Every lead dried up. Every promising thread turned into a dead end. Richard's case, once fresh and urgent, began to cool in the eyes of the public and, at times, even within law enforcement. The media coverage dwindled. The town slowly returned to routine life, and the hope of immediate answers faded. Yet for those detectives who had sworn to find the truth, the case was far from over. The cold reality was this. In 1995, even the most meticulous investigation could hit a wall. Witnesses moved away, memories faded, and evidence grew old. The frustration was tangible. The stakes were personal. Richard Martinez's life hung in the balance, and the community's trust in justice depended on detectives finding the answers. This was not a simple robbery or a random accident. It was a violent attack with no clear motive, and the person responsible was still free, walking among them. As months turned into years, investigators knew one thing with certainty. They had to preserve every piece of evidence, every account, every detail. The case was not closed. It was merely dormant, waiting for technology, insight, and persistence to bring the truth to light. Every officer involved knew that the smallest clue could change everything, and in a story defined by shadows and unanswered questions, that hope, the belief that justice could still be achieved would carry them forward. For 30 years, Richard Martinez's life became a delicate balance between survival and uncertainty. After the brutal attack on Highway 81, he endured surgeries, rehabilitation, and the ongoing challenges of living with injuries that left both visible scars and invisible ones. The young man who had once dreamed of a future filled with promise now faced a reality marked by pain, frustration, and lingering questions that no one could answer. Richard's family became his anchor, though the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on them. His mother spent countless nights worrying, pacing the rooms of her home, imagining worst-case scenarios and praying for a sign that he would recover fully. His father, stoic and resolute, focused on helping Richard regain strength, while his sister navigated the emotional turbulence of seeing her brother fight for life. Each family member experienced fear, hope, and occasional despair, caught in the tension between life as it once was and the uncertainty that now defined it. Friends and neighbors also felt the ripples of the attack. Richard had been a familiar presence in the community, a face everyone recognized, a young man whose absence was felt immediately. His sudden disappearance from the public eye, combined with the severity of his injuries, created a collective sense of loss. Conversations in the diner, on the streets, and at local gatherings were tinged with caution, sympathy, and a quiet worry. Who could commit such a violent act, and why? As Richard slowly regained consciousness after the attack, the reality of his situation became clear. Recovery was not just a physical process. It was a psychological battle. Memories of the attack, hazy and fragmented, haunted him. The questions that plagued him: who did this? Why me? Could I have prevented it? Were relentless. Yet he displayed remarkable resilience, showing a determination to reclaim his life despite the trauma. His struggle became emblematic of human perseverance, a testament to the strength needed to survive both physical violence and emotional uncertainty. The family's fight for answers was relentless. They stayed in constant contact with law enforcement, providing new leads when possible, revisiting the timeline of Richard's last night, and pushing detectives to maintain focus. Their persistence ensured that Richard's case remained a priority. Even as the years stretched on and other cases claimed public attention, the emotional toll, however, was heavy. Every unanswered question, every cold lead, became a small weight on their shoulders, a reminder of the justice that remained elusive. Community support played a crucial role in sustaining the family during this time. Local volunteers organized fundraisers, friends delivered meals, and neighbors offered assistance in any way they could. These gestures, though small in comparison to the enormity of the trauma, provided a sense of solidarity. They reminded the family on Richard that he was not alone in his fight, and that the community shared in both his suffering and his hope for resolution. For Richard himself, life became a study in patience and endurance. The young man who once moved through the world with ease now navigated it cautiously, mindful of both his physical limitations and the invisible scars of fear. Everyday activities that had once been taken for granted, walking alone on the street, running errands, even driving, were now tinged with caution. Each step was a reminder of vulnerability, yet also a demonstration of resilience. He refused to be defined by the attack. The psychological impact of surviving a violent assault cannot be overstated. Richard experienced anxiety, moments of depression, and a constant awareness of the unknown. Both through therapy, family support, and sheer determination, he began to reclaim aspects of his life. Small victories, conversation with a friend, a brief walk without fear. A sense of independence regained became milestones of progress. These moments, though seemingly minor, represented the triumph of human will over adversity, and offered hope that one day, answers might come. Throughout the 3 decades that followed, the family never stopped advocating for justice. They reminded investigators of overlooked details, pressed for evidence review, and kept the case in the public eye. They became partners in the investigation, understanding that persistence was as crucial as forensic skill. Their dedication ensured that Richard's story remained alive, a beacon for the detectives who never lost sight of the young man who had survived so much. As we continue into the investigation itself, it's essential to recognize the human side of this cold case. Richard Martinez's survival was not just about physical endurance. It was about the unwavering commitment of a family that refused to give up, the support of a community unwilling to forget, and the resilience of a young man determined to reclaim his life. The emotional stakes were high, the psychological impact profound, and the journey toward resolution would not be straightforward. Yet in every challenge faced by Richard and his family, there was a quiet determination that mirrored the persistence of the investigators themselves, a determination that would eventually lead to a breakthrough decades later. This chapter is a reminder. Behind every cold case lies a human story. Every statistic, every report, every clue is connected to someone's life, someone's hope, and someone's struggle. Richard Martinez's survival and his family's unwavering pursuit of justice underscores why cold cases matter, not just as puzzles to be solved, but as lives to be restored, one revelation at a time. 3 decades after Richard Martin's brutal attack on Highway 81, the case remained unsolved. The files, once brimming with leads that had gone cold, now sat quietly in evidence rooms. For most, 30 years would have been enough to declare the matter closed. But for the team at the Anderson County Sheriff's Office, the story was far from finished. The evolution of forensic science offered a new weapon a chance to finally uncover the truth. In 2024, investigators reopened Richard's case with a meticulous eye. Modern DNA testing, previously unavailable or unreliable, provided the first glimmer of hope. Samples collected from the original crime scene hair fibers, blood traces, and clothing fragments were reanalyzed using techniques that had not existed in 1995. These cutting-edge methods allowed investigators to generate a genetic profile that could be matched against law enforcement databases nationwide. Every strand of DNA, once overlooked, now held the potential to unravel the decades-old mystery. The team also employed advanced digital tools. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses, Long Archibald, was re-examined using facial recognition software and AI-enhanced image reconstruction. Even poor-quality tapes, once deemed unusable, were now capable of revealing subtle details, patterns of movement, license plate, fragments, and fleeting glimpses of individuals near the crime scene. Each digital enhancement added another layer to the unfolding investigation. Cell tower data, though limited in 1995, was revisited with modern techniques. Analysts were able to trace calls and triangulate locations with unprecedented accuracy, pinpointing areas where suspects or witnesses might have been present on the night of the attack. Combined with the reanalyzed physical evidence, these technological advances created a mosaic that detectives could finally piece together. A puzzle that had remained incomplete for 30 years was beginning to reveal its image. Investigators also revisited every eyewitness account, no matter how vague. Statements collected decades earlier were cross-referenced against new forensic findings. Inconsistencies were analyzed, corroborated, and, in some cases, clarified with new technological support. This process was painstaking. Each witness's memory had faded over time, but patterns began to emerge. Small details, previously dismissed as insignificant, now formed connections that led closer to the person responsible. Specialized canine units were deployed to the original attack area and surrounding locations, searching for residuals and traces that had persisted despite decades. The dogs indicated areas of interest, which investigators then examined with modern forensic tools. Even environmental factors, soil samples, pollen traces, and microscopic vegetation were analyzed to reconstruct the precise movements of both victim and assailant on the night of the attack. Each method, though unconventional, contributed to a clearer understanding of the crime scene. Hidden motives and financial background checks also became a focus. Investigators explored Richard's social and professional circles with a fresh lens. While initial inquiries in 1995 revealed no apparent motive, advanced databases now allowed a deeper look into possible connections, debts, and past disputes that could have played a role. This combination of social investigation, digital forensics, and traditional detective work created a multi-layered approach that had been impossible decades earlier. The breakthrough came when DNA evidence collected from Richard's clothing matched an individual and law enforcement databases. Bobby McClain, a man with a record that had remained under the radar in 1995, became the primary suspect. Investigators pieced together his movements that night using a combination of cell tower data, surveillance review, and witness cross-references. The mosaic of his presence along Highway 81 was undeniably. For the first time in 30 years, detectives had a tangible suspect, backed by evidence strong enough to proceed with charges. Detectives also re-examined the timeline of Richard's last movements before the attack, using both the original witness reports and modern reconstructions. They identified discrepancies that had been missed in the initial investigation. A seemingly minor detail brief, sighting of a vehicle parked near the roadside at an unusual hour, was now critical. The combination of DNA, digital enhancement, and detailed timeline analysis painted a comprehensive picture that had previously been invisible. The community, long waiting, in anxious silence, was shocked by the news. 30 years of uncertainty had finally yielded a concrete lead. Investigators carefully reviewed all aspects of the case before moving forward, ensuring that the evidence was not only compelling, but beyond reproach. Each element, scientific, testimonial, and circumstantial, was scrutinized, creating a foundation for a case that could withstand the scrutiny of modern courts. Through the persistence of law enforcement and the advances in forensic science, the unimaginable became reality. A young man who had survived a horrific attack decades ago could finally see progress toward justice. Families and community members, long haunted by the unknown, began to believe that closure was possible. The painstaking process, combining old-school detective work with state-of-the-art technology, demonstrated that even coldest cases could be revived with patience, skill, and modern innovation. This chapter of Richard Martin's story exemplifies the power of perseverance. It shows how dedication, coupled with evolving science, can bring light to shadows once thought impenetrable. Investigators never gave up, and the evidence, once overlooked or underutilized, finally had its moment to speak. Each detail, every hair, fiber, and fragment of DNA was a voice, telling the story that had waited silently for decades. As the investigation moved toward resolution, the combination of human intuition, tireless detective work, and forensic breakthroughs brought Richard Martin's story to a tipping point. The next chapter would not just reveal the identity of his attacker. It would demonstrate the triumph of modern science and persistence over decades of uncertainty, finally giving a survivor and his community the justice they had waited so long to see. May 2025. 30 years after the attack that nearly took Richard Martin's life, the Anderson County Sheriff's Office finally had its breakthrough. After decades of painstaking investigation, modern forensic techniques, and tireless detective work, authorities confidently named a suspect Bobby McClain. For the community, this revelation was both shocking and relieving. A case that had haunted neighbors, family, and law enforcement for decades was finally moving toward closure. The arrest itself was the culmination of years of meticulous planning. Detectives and federal agents coordinated to ensure the apprehension was executed safely and without compromise. Surveillance teams monitored McClain's known locations, waiting for the optimal moment to move in. The operation required precision, patience, and careful adherence to protocol. After 30 years, authorities could not afford any mistakes. The tension was palpable, and the weight of decades of unanswered questions hung over everyone involved. When officers approached McClain, there was a moment of disbelief. 30 years had passed since the violent night on Highway 81, yet here was the man investigators had long suspected. He was taken into custody without incident, his demeanor calm but tense. The community, initially unaware of the arrest in real time, would soon learn that the decades-long search for answers had finally produced a tangible result. For Richard and his family, it was validation that their persistence and hope had not been in vain. Detectives immediately began the process of corroborating the evidence. DNA results, which had been the critical breakthrough, were reviewed alongside witness statements, surveillance reconstruction, and cell tower data. Investigators painstakingly ensured that every piece of evidence aligned, creating a compelling narrative that tied McClain to the attack. The timeline of events, meticulously reconstructed over decades, finally connected the dots with a clarity that had been impossible in 1995. Interviews with McClain revealed inconsistencies that further strengthened the case. Investigators, armed with both old and new evidence, were able to confront him with undeniable facts. The combination of scientific proof and detailed investigative work left little room for doubt. The once gold trail that had frustrated detectives for 30 years now led directly to the man responsible for the near-fatal assault on Highway 81. The sheriff's office made a public announcement, carefully crafted to respect both the investigative process and the community's emotions. They described the arrest, the evidence, and the painstaking journey that had brought justice to light. Media coverage spread quickly, with local and national outlets highlighting the extraordinary nature of the case. 30 years of uncertainty, fear, and speculation were finally met with concrete answers, validating the efforts of law enforcement and the unwavering hope of Richard's family. Richard Martin, the survivor at the heart of this decades-long investigation, expressed relief and cautious optimism. The long shadow of the attack, which had shaped his life in countless ways, was now facing accountability. While no amount of justice could erase the trauma he had endured, the arrest of Bobby McClain marked a significant turning point where closure, accountability, and truth finally intersected. The community, long haunted by the unknown, experienced a mix of emotions. Relief, validation, and lingering shock intermingled as neighbors processed the news. Conversations that had once been filled with fear and speculation now included acknowledgement of the detective work and scientific advancements that made the resolution possible. For a small town in South Carolina, the arrest was more than a procedural matter. It was the restoration of faith in the idea that truth, no matter how delayed, could still prevail. The case also highlighted the evolution of investigative techniques. What had been nearly impossible in 1995 became achievable in 2025 thanks to technological advancements and methodological persistence. Detectives reflected on the interplay between traditional investigative rigor and modern scientific tools. Each contributed equally to the breakthrough, proving that patience, diligence, and innovation are critical to solving even the most complex cold cases. For Richard's family, the arrest brought a sense of justice that had been absent for decades. Parents, siblings, and extended relatives could finally see that the system, though slow, had eventually delivered answers. Their years of advocacy, persistence, and attention to detail had played an essential role in keeping the case alive. By maintaining contact with law enforcement, reviewing case files, and supplying insights from their intimate knowledge of Richard's life, they had contributed to a process that would finally provide resolution. Legal proceedings were initiated swiftly, with prosecutors preparing a case built on irrefutable evidence. DNA confirmation, corroborating witness statements, digital reconstructions, and the meticulous investigative timeline combined to create a compelling legal narrative. Bobby McClain faced charges, not only for the attack itself, but for the decades-long impact his actions had inflicted on Richard Martin and the community at large. Every aspect of the prosecution was designed to ensure that justice was thorough, fair, and unassailable. The arrest and case resolution demonstrated that even the most daunting cold cases could be solved with time, technology, and relentless investigative work. 30 years of unanswered questions, fear, and emotional turmoil culminated in a moment of accountability, proving that patience, combined with modern forensic innovation, can bring closure even to the most complex mysteries. Richard Martin's life, once suspended in uncertainty, could now move toward healing, acknowledgement, and, finally, justice. This chapter exemplifies the intersection of human resilience, technological progress, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. Richard Martin survived a violent attack that left physical and psychological scars. His family, the investigators, and the community persevered through decades of uncertainty, and Bobby McClain, the man responsible, was finally brought to justice, proving that time, combined with modern forensic science and dedication, can illuminate even the darkest corners of a long unsolved crime. As we move forward, the story of Richard Martin stands as a testament to persistence, community support, and the unyielding human desire for justice. The case may have spanned decades, but it reminds us that cold cases are never truly beyond reach. With Batien's innovation and relentless determination, even the most elusive mysteries can finally be solved. When news broke that Bobby McClain had been arrested in connection with the attack on Richard Martin 3 decades earlier, the town of Anderson County experienced a wave of emotions, unlike anything it had seen in years. Shock and disbelief were immediate. Relief and cautious optimism followed shortly after. For a community that had lived with lingering uncertainty for so long, this moment was nothing short of historic. Local media outlets covered the story extensively. News anchors described the arrest with reverence for the decades-long investigation that had led to this moment. Headlines highlighted the persistence of law enforcement, the advancements in forensic science, and the resilience of Richard Martin himself. Across newspapers, online portals, and television broadcasts, the message was clear. Justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. Community members shared their reactions openly. Longtime residents recalled the fear and unease that had shadowed Highway 81 for years. Parents remembered cautioning their children about late-night drives. Friends of Richard reflected on the uncertainty that had hung over social gatherings, the quiet tension that lingered whenever the attack was mentioned. Now, those memories were tempered by relief, tempered by the knowledge that the perpetrator had been held accountable. At the local diner, Nancy's, where Richard had been, last seen conversations were filled with emotion. Patrons remembered him vividly, sharing stories of his kindness, his bright smile, and his quiet ambition. Many expressed a sense of closure, knowing that the young man whose life had been nearly destroyed could finally see some resolution. The diner, once a backdrop to fear and speculation, became a symbolic center for the community's shared relief and hope. The sheriff's office issued public statements, emphasizing both the investigative process and the role of technology in solving the case. Detectives highlighted the collaboration between local officers, federal agents, forensic specialists, and even the family of Richard Martin by presenting the narrative carefully. Authorities reinforced confidence in law enforcement's ability to pursue justice, even after decades. The public, witnessing such transparency, responded with gratitude and admiration for the painstaking work that had gone into solving the case. Social media and online forums, though modern additions that had not existed during the initial investigation, played a role in shaping public reaction. Posts discussing the arrest went viral locally, with residents expressing relief, sharing memories, and debating the impact of cold case investigations. The story resonated beyond Anderson County, illustrating how persistence, modern forensic science, and determination could restore faith in justice. People across the country engaged with the narrative, marveling at the 30-year journey from attack to arrest. For Richard Martin's family, the community's support was deeply meaningful. Neighbors sent letters of encouragement, friends called to share their relief, and strangers expressed admiration for their perseverance. This widespread recognition underscored a vital truth. While justice can be delayed, it can never be denied entirely when a community and law enforcement remain committed. Their advocacy and relentless hope had been amplified by a collective desire to see fairness restored. Media coverage also explored the broader implications of the case. Experts in criminal justice and forensic science were interviewed, explaining how technology such as DNA analysis, facial recognition, and cell tower data had transformed cold case investigations. These insights educated the public on the evolving nature of law enforcement and forensic methodology, highlighting the intersection of science, patience, and human intuition. For viewers, the story became more than a local incident. It was an example of the power of modern investigative techniques to overcome decades-old mysteries. The emotional impact on the town was palpable. Residents expressed pride in the detectives who refused to abandon the case, in the scientists who applied modern technology, and in the family who never stopped seeking answers. Community meetings and informal gatherings were filled with conversations reflecting on the fragility of life, the resilience of human beings, and the reassurance that justice, no matter how delayed, is achievable. Finally, the media coverage celebrated Richard Martin's courage. While much of the story focused on the arrest and the evidence, outlets also emphasized his survival, his recovery, and his resilience in the face of unimaginable trauma. By highlighting the human side of the story, journalists ensured that the narrative was not only about law enforcement and crime solving, but about the enduring strength of individuals and families who refuse to give up, even when the odds seem insurmountable. The collective reaction of the community underscored the importance of perseverance in the pursuit of justice. 30 years after the attack, fear and uncertainty had been replaced with relief and a renewed sense of faith in law enforcement. Residents could finally move forward without the shadow of unanswered questions looming over them. The story of Richard Martin, once a cautionary tale of violence and mystery, had become a testament to human resilience, the power of technology, and the unwavering commitment of both investigators and community members to see justice served. As the dust settled on Richard Martin's case, the story of his attack, survival, and eventual justice left a profound mark, not only on the family and the community, but also on law enforcement and the broader field of criminal investigation. 30 years of unanswered questions, painstaking detective work, and modern forensic breakthroughs provided invaluable lessons for future generations of investigators. First and foremost, the case underscored the importance of persistence. Detectives and investigators never allowed the passage of time to diminish their commitment. Even when leads dried up and the trail grew cold, the team maintained meticulous records, preserved evidence, and kept the case alive. Their unwavering dedication proved that persistence is often the single most crucial factor in solving cold cases. For those in law enforcement, Richard Martin's story became a reference point, demonstrating that patience, diligence, and attention to detail can eventually bring clarity and accountability. The integration of technology was equally transformative. While the initial investigation in 1995 faced the limitations of the era, advances in DNA analysis, facial recognition, digital reconstruction, and cell tower triangulation turned what had once seemed impossible into reality. Each scientific breakthrough provided critical evidence that reconnected old leads with modern tools. Forensic experts and detectives alike recognized the case as a testament to the evolving capabilities of law enforcement, illustrating how technology, when combined with traditional investigative skill, can uncover the truth even decades later. Another lesson came from the importance of community and family involvement. Richard's family never allowed the case to fade into obscurity. Their advocacy, insights, and persistence kept law enforcement focused and reminded investigators of the human stakes behind every detail. The community's role through awareness, support, and engagement also contributed to the eventual resolution. This partnership between law enforcement and those most affected by crime became a model for future cold case investigations, highlighting that justice is a collaborative effort. The case also emphasized meticulous evidence preservation. Items collected from the crime scene 30 years ago, once deemed minor or technologically unusable, became pivotal when re-examined with modern techniques. Hair fibers, clothing fragments, and even subtle environmental traces proved critical when analyzed with advanced forensic methods. Investigators recognized the importance of storing evidence carefully, understanding that scientific advancements could one day make the previously unusable crucial in solving the case. Richard Martin's story highlighted the psychological and social dimensions of surviving violent crime. His resilience, combined with the family's support, underscored how survival is not just about physical recovery but also emotional endurance. The trauma endured over 3 decades could have been a story of despair. Instead, it became a narrative of hope, determination, and eventual justice. Law enforcement and criminal psychologists alike noted that understanding survivor experiences is essential to cold case management and community healing. The case set a precedent for handling decades-old investigations. Departments learned that cold cases should not be shelved indefinitely. Instead, they can serve as living archives of lessons in methodology, persistence, and interdepartmental collaboration. The collaboration between local officers, federal agencies, forensic scientists, and digital analysts in Richard's case illustrated the benefits of multidisciplinary approaches in modern policing. Media involvement and public engagement also shaped the legacy. Transparent communication about the investigation's progress, technological methods, and eventual arrest helped restore faith in the justice system. The coverage not only informed the public but educated them about the evolution of crime-solving techniques. For communities grappling with uncertainty, the case became a blueprint for the importance of patience, transparency, and collaboration. Finally, Richard Martin's case left a legacy in the form of hope. Survivors of violent crime, families of missing persons, and communities haunted by unresolved incidents could see that time, persistence, and innovation could lead to answers. Even when decades pass, cold cases are never truly beyond reach. This realization encouraged law enforcement agencies to revisit old cases, knowing that breakthroughs can arrive unexpectedly, often turning despair into resolution. The broader lesson extends beyond law enforcement. Richard's story reminds us that justice, while delayed, is Sachibab. It demonstrates the enduring human capacity to persevere in the face of uncertainty. It reinforces the need for technology, collaboration, and persistence in uncovering truth. Most importantly, it underscores the emotional and social importance of ensuring that survivors, families, and communities see the value of their patience, advocacy, and resilience, rewarded with accountability. As viewers reflect on this story, the legacy of the South Carolina cold case is clear. Crime may leave long shadows, but persistence, innovation, and human determination can illuminate even the darkest corners. Richard Martin's journey from attack to survival, from decades of uncertainty to eventual justice, is a powerful reminder that cold cases are never truly cold. They are living stories of hope, science, and human resilience, demonstrating that even the longest waits can end with truth, resolution, and the restoration of faith in justice. Asterisk. After 30 years of uncertainty, fear, and relentless investigation, the story of Richard Martin reaches its conclusion. The arrest of Bobby McClain did more than solve a decades-old crime. It restored hope, provided closure, and proved that justice, no matter how delayed, can still prevail. For Richard, his family, and the Anderson County community, this resolution was transformative. Richard's journey illustrates the enduring resilience of the human spirit. Surviving a brutal attack and living with the trauma for decades required courage beyond measure. The scars, both physical and emotional, serve as a testament to his perseverance. While no amount of justice can erase the suffering, the identification and apprehension of his attacker brought a sense of validation. For 30 years, questions lingered. Now, answers finally arrived. The case also underscores the evolution of investigative techniques. Advances in forensic science, digital reconstruction, and data analysis transform cold cases from unsolvable mysteries into opportunities for resolution. DNA evidence, once limited and slow to analyze, became the linchpin of justice. Combined with modern investigative methods, these tools allowed detectives to piece together the puzzle that had baffled them for decades. The story demonstrates how science, when paired with persistence and meticulous detective work, can illuminate even the darkest cases. Equally important is the role of family and community. Richard's family never stopped advocating for him, keeping his story alive in the hearts of detectives and in the public eye. Their unwavering support, patience, and faith in justice exemplify the human element that drives investigations forward. Communities, too, play a crucial role through awareness, support, and vigilance. They can be the difference between a case fading into obscurity and a cold case returning to the forefront of law. Enforcement attention. For the Anderson County Sheriff's Office, this case serves as a milestone. It illustrates that even after decades, investigations must continue with diligence, care, and respect for evolving technology. Detectives, past and present, demonstrated that patience, combined with modern tools, can ultimately achieve what once seemed impossible. This legacy of dedication is a lesson for every law enforcement professional handling cold cases. Nationwide, the resolution of Richard Martin's case leaves an enduring impact. It is a story of survival, community resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice. It reminds viewers that even in the most challenging circumstances, persistence, innovation, and collaboration can overcome the most complex obstacles. The case also serves as a reminder that victims, survivors, and their families are central to the pursuit of justice, and their voices, memories, and advocacy are crucial to uncovering the truth. As we close this chapter, it is clear that cold cases are never truly cold. Each detail, each clue, and each piece of evidence holds the potential to uncover the truth, even after decades. Richard Martinez's story exemplifies the importance of never giving up on victims, on investigations, or on the hope that justice will ultimately prevail. In the end, the South Carolina 1995 cold case is more than a story of crime. It is a story of survival, endurance, and human resilience. It is a testament to the power of science, dedication, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. And most importantly, it is a story of closure, proof that even the darkest mysteries can be resolved, and that justice, though delayed, can still shine.